Good afternoon, and welcome to the AWARE webinar, ACICS webinar announcing, relating, and explaining the September 2015 memorandum to the field. Today's presenters are Dr. Albert C. Gray, President and CEO, Mr. Anthony Beta, Vice President, External Affairs, Ms. Susan Greer, Vice President, Accreditation Operations, Ms. Perlita Walters-Gilliam, Associate Vice President, Quality Enhancement and Training, Mr. Ian Harrisduck, Senior Manager Compliance, and Ms. Teron King, Senior Manager Policy and Institutional Review. The agenda for today's webinar will be as follows. A welcome from Dr. Gray, discussion of the 2016 ACICS Professional Development Conference. Topic 1, proposed changes to the accreditation criteria. Topic 2, for information only. And last but certainly not least, questions and comments. I will now turn it over to Dr. Gray for the welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Al Gray, and it's my privilege to welcome you to today's AWARE webinar. And as always, we appreciate the engagement and support of you, our members. Together, we're working to continuously improve your accreditation process and to work toward more and more student success. So remember, if you care, you must be aware. It's me again, and this is our commercial. Just want to alert you to save the dates for our outstanding professional development conference that will be held in May 11th through 13th in Fort Worth, Texas. Promises to be another great experience in terms of professional development, great interaction with your peers, as well as presentations from vendors and school executives, school administrators, and faculty. So save the date.
To view the memorandum that we'll be discussing during today's webinar, please go to the ACICS website, click on Council Actions, followed by Memorandum to the Field, and then 2015 September. So we will get started with Topic 1, Proposed Criteria Revisions. And just to give you the overview of what we will discuss, we'll start with Council Action Process, Unannounced Visits, Community Resources, Teaching Loads, Faculty Assignments, Applied General Education, Glossary of Definitions, Faculty Preparation, Admissions and Recruitment, Campus Effectiveness Plan, Branch and Learning Site Procedures, and Faculty Assignments at the doctoral level. And I will now turn it over to Ian for the Council Action Process.
Hello, this is Ian Harrisduck, Senior Manager of Compliance. If you are following along, as Teron said, with the memorandum to the field, I am on page 1, which starts with the council action process. So this is the first 5 pages of the memo. The real meat of the changes are on the first 2 pages, and I'll go over a bit of what those changes are and hitting the highlights of the important changes to those. The first change is that we are now proposing, the council is proposing a clear indication as to when an institution is out of compliance. This is now with the terminology of compliance warning that had previously been in the student achievement review. It's now proposed to be for all actions by the council. There will be the opportunity for a compliance warning, which would be the indication that an institution is out of compliance. Secondly, there is the possibility of a show cause directive, which is now defined or proposed as defined as if the council determines that an institution is unlikely to become in compliance, then the council would issue a show cause directive. In either of these cases, the institution will continue to be allowed the procedural guarantees to respond to all the written areas of compliance, written areas of non-compliance, excuse me. So the council will, in writing, issue this action to the institution, and the institution will be required to respond in writing if they're deemed to be out of compliance through these two terminologies. One of the main reasons for the proposal of this change, or this proposed change, is that it will now be consistent across all actions taken by the council, so student achievement review, on-site evaluation visits, and any council review such as the annual review of financial statements or annual review, well, we already said annual review of student achievement, but any financial concerns or any adverse action taken would now have a consistent determination of what action would be taken. Appendix A of the memo, which is on page 20 of the ACICS memorandum to the field, details all the different actions and the processes that could take place. So those are the main changes. Pages 3 through 5 of the memo have some other proposed changes, but those are all as a result of the terminology change to compliance warning and show cause directive changes. So those are proposed due to the changes on the first two pages. So that is the council action process item. I'll move on now and also present for unannounced visits the proposed change to that action. Currently, an unannounced visit by the council can only occur if there's some major complaint or adverse that the council receives. The proposed change for this new language is that unannounced visit can occur at any time. So instead of just when the council receives particular information from an outside source or a complaint, now the council would is proposing the change to be an unannounced at any time. And I will now throw it over to Ms. Perlita Walters-Gilliam for the next item.
Hey everyone, welcome to the AWARE webinar. I am Perlita Walters-Gilliam, Associate Vice President of Quality Enhancement and Training. I apologize, but I have a serious case of toddler cooties, and I have lost my voice. Hopefully you can hear and understand me as I attempt to explain the next three proposed criteria changes. The first one is community resources. This, for those of you who have been through the evaluation process, on either side of the table, this has been a common area of confusion. So the council is proposing to provide some clarity on two of the areas. One, the variety of activities that are expected by program. That comes up a lot on visits, where is one activity sufficient or not. The proposed change will make it clear that a variety of activities are expected. And the focus should be on student achievement. There's also been a source of confusion on community resources versus community outreach, and these are different. So the proposed change in the criteria, 3-1-512C, as well as the glossary definition of community resources, help provide some additional clarification in those areas. The next area, teaching loads. Sections 3-2-101 and 3-3-302, that covers the non-degree as well as the occupational associate degree levels of the criteria. Currently, the language includes a limitation on the teaching loads of faculty members to 32 hours of instruction. The proposed change would remove that 32-hour limit, with the expectation that, like with all other credential levels, it would be reasonable and appropriate for and justifiable as well. Ultimately, the emphasis and the burden is on the institution to justify the teaching loads at any credential level. So that's the proposed change. the area of faculty assignments in the applied general education area, sections 3-2-104 and 3-3-202. Similarly, these two criteria are in the non-degree and occupational associate degree levels. Currently, it just says, the language says general education. A bachelor's degree is required for teaching general education. The council, to make it clear that the expectation is only for applied gen ed, which is consistent with occupational associates, the word applied has been added to that criterion. And we also would like to take into consideration that coursework complete at the doctoral level would serve as qualifying credits for teaching. So we've also added that into that criterion. And I'll turn it over to Ron, I believe, to take it to discuss the glossary of definitions.
Thanks, Perlita. Regarding the glossary of definitions, the Council proposes revisions to the definitions of lecture, laboratory, and in-service training. Specifically, the proposal is suggesting replacement of dated language in these definitions with language referring to new teaching procedures and methodologies. Additionally, the language is amended to clarify that students must be working under the supervision of an instructor during laboratory hours. And I want to turn it back over to Perlita to discuss faculty preparation.
Me again with my very interesting sounding voice. For faculty preparation, some of you may remember that ACRO has always been recognized as an acceptable evaluator of foreign credentials. ACICS made a decision some years ago to remove ACRO and only have ACICS and AICE in section 3-1-541, and also other areas referring to library, professional librarian credentials. The proposal right now is to bring back ACRO and just add ACRO as another one. So to be ACICS, ACRO, and AICE. And that's a simple enough change. I'll turn it over to Ian.
Hello again, it's Ian. So I'll do another relatively simple change. It's just clarifying the admission and recruitment standards in section 3-1-410 of the accreditation criteria. The main changes or proposed changes to this language is that all recruitment and admission practices must be monitored by the institution, and that these activities cannot be delegated to anyone doing it through unethical means, public scrutiny, or admitting ill-prepared applicants. This is just a clarification so it's clear to the field that this is the intent of this language. And with that change, I'll throw it right back to Perlita for changes to the campus effectiveness plan.
This has been a pretty fun area. The CEP, we provide workshops in this area, so we believe it's a very instrumental document that should drive and guide the operations, the effectiveness operations at the campus in terms of how you measure and document and do self-assessment. And ACICS is continually trying to improve our expectations from the institution. What are we looking for with this plan? Hoping that it's not just an exercise for ACICS, but that the membership really embrace the intent of using it for self-improvement. And we know that the current language in 3-1-110 through 113 have been confusing, have been somewhat grayer than normal. And we're, with this proposed changes, because there are a few of them, we're hoping that the membership have better guidance and teams are able to provide better reviews on site as well. The key components of the changes are the deletion of language that was not implemented, and that refers specifically to the institutional effectiveness plan, which is focused on the distributed enterprise, since ACICS did not explore that and did not get approval for it, we're removing that language from the CEP area altogether so it's clearer and schools know what the expectations are. Every campus must have a plan. So remove that language. Excuse me. The definitions were also confusing. They were not real definitions. If a definition includes the defined word more than once, then it's not a definition. So we worked on cleaning that up quite a bit, and that includes the placement rate, retention, outcomes, institutional outcomes versus student learning outcomes, the level of satisfaction. So we provide some clarity in the definitions as well. We also added as a required element student satisfaction. So we have retention, placement, student learning outcomes, level of graduate satisfaction, level of employer satisfaction. We're proposing to add level of student satisfaction. That's one area that we have observed that most institutions already conduct that evaluation, either at the end of courses, at the end of terms, or annually. So we do not feel that would have been a burdensome addition to the evaluation process. You just get another source of feedback from your current students. Graduation rate. I'm sorry, there was one more revision that we're proposing to delete graduation rate as a required element. And I'm sorry about that. We're adding student satisfaction and removing graduation rate. Now,
welcome, everyone. This is Sue Greer. I am going to take just a few moments to go over the branch and learning site procedures, which are proposed revisions. As many of my colleagues have already used the term today for clarification purposes, that's what this criteria is also referencing. We have procedurally removed any reference to final inclusion of a branch or a learning site application process, and this criteria will now clean that up so that it is clear that our decision-making body, when it's a substantive change, is the decision-making authority, and every visit and action after that is a quality assurance monitoring. And with that, I will throw the slides to Dr. Gray.
Thank you, Sue. I just want to cover the faculty assignments at the doctoral level, section 37-502. As I'm sure all of you are aware, ACICS will be submitting our petition for departmental re-recognition early next year. And this time, as part of that petition, we're also going to be seeking expansion of our scope to conferring accreditation at the doctoral level. In meetings we've had with the department and discussions with the accreditation state liaison personnel in the department, they've made it clear to us that the qualifications of faculty in the doctoral program are key elements in approval of an entity to be a quality assurance provider, such as an accreditor, in that regard. So we're very sensitive to that, and what we've done is proposed for consideration some fortification of the assignments at the doctoral level. Specifically that, or let me put it this way, the key components of this fortification are that clarification will be that certification where applicable is required in addition to the terminal degree. In other words, where a faculty must have a terminal degree to teach in a doctoral program, if there is certification in that area of endeavor or study, then that certification must also be possessed by the faculty member in addition to their terminal degree. And also a requirement that doctoral level faculty not should be but must be engaged in research activities. In other words, out of the classroom activities such as publication in reviewed journals or participation in sponsored research projects, things of that nature, will be a requirement of doctoral level faculty. And with that, let me turn it back to Tehran.
Thank you, Al, Sue, Ian, and Perlita for assisting with presenting those slides. So now we're going to move on to topic 2 for information only. And in this section of or part of the webinar, we will discuss review of institutional disclosures of student achievement, Systematic Review Advisory Committee, known as the SRAC, and Placement Verification Program, known as the PVP. And I am going to turn it over to Tony, who will discuss the review of institutional student achievement disclosures.
Thank you, Tehran. This is Tony Bita, Vice President for External Affairs. And I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today about a prolonged discussion that the Council has had regarding the disclosures publicly of indications of student achievement, institutional student achievement. And of course, this fits under the general topic of disclosures regarding institutional effectiveness, and that the oversight partners, the Department of Education, some of the state approval authorities, and certainly the accreditation community, as well as the Title IV folks at the department, do expect that indications of institutional effectiveness, including student achievement, be part of the information that is available to students at the front end of the process, so they can use that to make informed enrollment decisions, and that the information that they are reviewing is reliable, accurate, and manifests integrity. So that discussion has led to a decision by Council to require some additional review by ACICS of those disclosures through a process, an additional process, and some additional steps that we will discuss in a few minutes. Some of the characteristics that the Council has talked about in terms of best practices and what they would like to see those disclosures aspire to, include the characteristics of accuracy, clarity, and accountability of that information, and that information will be reviewed not only during the accreditation cycle, as it is now to some degree, but also outside of the normal accreditation cycle. In this case, it will be done remotely through website monitoring and outreach. The data that we are able to gather in this regard will be collected, analyzed, and presented for review by Council. Next slide, please. To give you some additional context, as I mentioned, the other oversight partners, collecting this information and demonstrating a greater deal of strength in reviewing and providing feedback to member institutions is important to ACICS in demonstrating compliance with our recognition requirements, both by the Department of Education and by the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. Regarding the Department of Ed's expectations, it is that ACICS and all accreditors demonstrate a capacity and performance relative to effective and continuous quality review of institutions, not only during the normal accreditation cycle, but also between full accreditation reviews. This new project will fulfill some of that expectation. It also is relevant to CHIA Standard 12B1, which is imposed on all accreditors recognized by CHIA, and CHIA expects the accreditors that are CHIA members to enforce upon their member institutions requirement that those institutions disclose indications of institutional effectiveness, including student achievement as defined by the institution. CHIA nor the department are necessarily prescriptive in what constitutes indicators of student achievement, nor is ACICS prescriptive outside of those indicators that are required as part of campus effectiveness and institutional effectiveness planning and programming. However, I think it is important to recognize that in all those cases, be it gainful employment disclosures, be it disclosures for the department's program integrity requirements, be it disclosures related to institutional effectiveness plans and the campus accountability report, those all constitute minimum requirements. Those all represent a base of information. There is nothing in the accreditation community or within the Department of Education or within the state approval authorities that would prevent an institution from disclosing more than that, or in tailoring or packaging that information so that it is more useful to students, that it is clearer to students, and it is more of a resource to them in making decisions regarding enrollment. And so the institutional disclosure requirement that is manifest in the ACICS standards is 3-1-704, which you recall was created and applied about 3 years ago, coming out of our last recognition cycle with the Department of Education and with GIA. Next slide, please. So how will your disclosures of student information and institutional effectiveness be reviewed by ACICS? Well, it will be an online review that will be conducted by designated and trained staff at ACICS. Folks that we have had do this before will be trained again and brought up to speed in terms of what is expected and how to apply and how to scrutinize the material they encounter online and capture it and categorize it for purposes of analysis. These random reviews will occur will be applied to several hundred member institutions a year. That will include website disclosures, publications, and advertisements. Things that we can access online will be subject to that review. The disclosures that will be reviewed, categories of disclosures, include on-time graduation rates, retention and placement, your performance relative to licensure exam pass rates, and certainly professional certification rates. Those are some of the factors or some of the elements that would be looked at. Keep in mind, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, nor does this represent an expectation by the Council that the disclosures of any given institution must include all of these, but rather the institution must decide which of these, or others if appropriate, should be disclosed regarding student achievement, and are they being disclosed in a way that is accessible, that is clear, and is manifest with integrity. Next slide, please. We've developed at ACICS, based on a review of what is currently going on out there, regionally accredited institutions, nationally accredited institutions, and requirements of other accreditors. We've developed a best practices guide that we will be distributing shortly that will give member institutions some additional guidance in what are the characteristics that they should aspire to, and what will be some of the characteristics that Council will be looking at as they see the data that comes in. We will also schedule a webinar in the immediate future to provide an opportunity for institutions to ask some questions about the contents of that best practices guide and how to apply it. So a substantial number of school websites we anticipate will be reviewed yet this month. And those website review then will produce written feedback to member institutions. It will be informational. It will not be compliance correspondence. It will be, this is what we found. This is how it comports with best practices. Here are some areas where there may be some issues. The schools will be afforded an opportunity to respond if there are any deficiencies identified, but they're not required to respond. We're trying to establish a process for the dialogue between the Council and member institutions. So, of course, the schools will be afforded an opportunity to respond. So then the findings of our analysis internally, as well as responses from the member institutions, will be reviewed by council. That keeps in line with the dynamic that accomplishes the difficult work of establishing standards and enforcing them and applying them consistently over time and across various institutions. Next slide, please. And with that, I will turn it over to Perlita Walters-Gilliam.
Hi, me again. I think everybody that enjoys hearing my voice. The SRAC, Student Review Advisory Committee, similar to ACICS expectations at the graduate level or institutions at the graduate level to have an oversight committee that includes specific stakeholders. ACICS will be going through the same exercise to ensure consistent feedback and collaboration with various stakeholders, the students, graduates, employers, faculty members, so we can get different perspectives as we systematically review our criteria. There's always evolution in this industry, and we would like to solicit your participation in that process. Similarly, we'll be asking you to do a survey immediately following this webinar, because we believe that your input is valuable to this process. Otherwise, if we propose a change and we get no feedback, then the implementation does not take into account how it affects you. And that's the intent of the SRAC, is to get that consistent feedback from different groups. And also including the webinar in the memo to the field, we have the 4 groups, what the qualifications of the stakeholders, and how you can nominate a representative from your advisory board for your employers or your faculty members, students who are very active on campus, faculty members who may be program chairs or maybe steering committee chairs, or just individuals who you believe would make a significant contribution or be willing to participate in this process, because there'll be an expectation of having webinars, at least 2 or 3 meetings, providing feedback via surveys and other documents. So we really would appreciate your cooperation as we work to make ACICS get that strengthen our criteria as much as possible. And with that, I'll move it on to Sue, I believe, for the PVP.
Did you hear the joy in her voice? Our placement verification program has been in beta testing for a year, and we're very pleased to announce that that testing went extremely well. Our system that we use for capturing our internal verification of placement is very appropriate, easy to use, and we're getting very good results. Therefore, January 2016, we will be launching full scale with our internal PVP program. We will be selecting 20% of our member institutions each year, so everyone will be touched at least once in a 5-year period. The process will require, when you are contacted by ACICS, to submit that month's worth of placement. So if we contact you at the end of January, we would inform you that we would ask you to provide us with your February placement activity and submit within a reasonable period of time at the 1st of March. All of this will be provided to you in very concise emails with all of the information and the requirements. You can at this point, and we will have a webinar, and I'll send everybody the links in the very near future, but those of you on this webinar can see that if you go to www.acicspvp.com and log in using your institutional login and password, you will be able to see the spreadsheet that we will be using to collect placement activity. The webinar will be scheduled in December, and we're hoping for any questions that you have prior to that. We are doing this at a random selection process, so we will not be sharing who's going to be selected in advance, but we will tag everybody, as I've said, within a 5-year period of time. The expectation is for a sample of placements, which will allow us to set a measurement as to the quality of your staff and your understanding of the ACICS placement requirements. And with that, I'm hoping everyone is as excited as Per Leader was that we are finally starting the PVP process, and more to come. I will now hand this off to Tehran.
Thank you to Tony, Perlita, and Susan for providing us some valuable information on new things to come from ACICS. At this point, we have concluded our informational slides, and we will move into the question and answer. I would like to first start by answering a few questions that have been asked regarding whether the webinar is being recorded, and the answer to that is yes. At the conclusion of this webinar, the actual webinar slide deck or the PowerPoint presentation will be uploaded to the ACICS website. However, the recording, which has to go through some editing, will be posted at some time tomorrow. So you can have access to the slide deck today, but the actual recording will not be posted until tomorrow. And then you are more than welcome to listen and review as much as you would like. And I'm going to start off the first question, since it's geared toward the Campus Accountability Report. No, we're not discussing the car during this session, since this is specifically regarding the topics of the memorandum to the field. However, if you have questions about the car, you can feel free to contact me directly, either via phone or via email.
And the next question is, please clarify, advisory committees will no longer count towards community resource utilization? And the answer is no. Actually, they will still count. The language is just revised so that one, it says a variety, but if you look at the glossary definition, it says organizations that, let me read it specifically so that I don't misspeak. A variety of individuals, organizations, and businesses that provide information, guidance, or support to a specific program of study. So a program advisory committee is an organization that provides guidance, so it would count. The focus here would be that it has to be a variety. Previously, there has been some confusion in the field. Just the PAC would suffice, and no, the PAC by itself would not suffice.
The next question asks, how is ill-prepared applicants defined? That's referring to our change in section 3-1-410, where we clarify the admission and recruitment practices. There's been no change specifically to the language of ill-prepared applicants. That had been in the previous language and is still in the proposed language. So there's no particular change on what an ill-prepared applicant is. However, generally, that would be somebody who does not meet the admission requirements of the institution, and if the institution knows prior to them being a potential student that they wouldn't make, wouldn't be able to be admitted, then they would be considered ill-prepared applicants.
The next one is concerning the CEP. For the proposed revision to the CEP, if these become effective January 1, will schools going through reaccreditation through winter 2016 travel cycle be expected to have the student satisfaction element included with their CEP? No, they would not be required. If the effective date is January, then it would not be reasonable to expect that in the CEP. However, all the proposed criteria will not be effective until July 1, 2016, except the council action process, which specifically says that it will be effective in January. All the other proposed would be July 1, 2016.
It's Ian again, and the next question also refers to section 3-1-410. I thought that was a pretty clear one and just had some clarifying statements, but of course there are some questions to that, which of course is something we encourage. So that question asks, would an on-site long-term consultant count as an employee or non-employee for admission monitoring purposes? We wouldn't really have a determination on whether they'd be considered an employee or a non-employee. That would be up to the institution to determine that. However, the important point to make about this is that the institution would be required to monitor that individual for admission and recruitment practices and make sure they're giving, accurate information and not doing any of the things that the institution's not allowed to delegate, which is like admitting ill-prepared applicants and other things noted in the criteria.
If a faculty member does not have a related terminal degree in the area for which they teach, how will we know they're qualified to teach in that area? For example, if they have a terminal degree in art but teach economics, they would only be qualified if they have professional experience. This, I'm assuming that this is based on the revision to the inclusion of doctoral coursework as qualifications for the non-degree faculty. And we're just saying if you're teaching economics, for example, and you're pursuing a doctoral degree and you completed coursework in economics at the doctoral level, those credits would help qualify you to teach. And I'm not sure if if I answered the question accurately or not. If not, let us know and I will try again.
Yes, this is Sue, and there was a question with respect to the PVP. The question was, I'm looking at, if we use a completely third-party verifier that's been considered an approved provider by ACICS to confirm 100% of our outcomes, would ACICS accept their results in lieu of contacting grads and employers again, so we're not overburdening grads and employers? We've had that question several times, and I apologize for any confusion that may have been distributed throughout this beta testing process. But the decision from management at this point when we launch full scale is we will not accept any third-party verifiers in lieu of our PVP. We encourage third-party verifiers as it is a good risk aversion tactic by the schools. So with respect to us accepting that activity in lieu of our PVP, the answer to that is no. And I will now throw it to Perlita.
A few more CEP questions to the top, and apparently answered the question of doctoral issue. So, is 3 years of data still recommended for the CEP, since there's no longer to be IEPs? The 3-year data collection recommendation was for both, for the CPs and the IEPs. And the criterion currently says that you should take into account the 3 years worth of data. If you have the 3 years worth of data, you use it. If you don't, then you can't. There's another CEP question. In the past, ACICS has issued CEP guidance and an example CEP. Will ACICS provide this if the proposed changes are approved? If so, when might that be available to institutions? Very good question. We actually do have a sample CEP on our website. It's a Central College 2015-2016 CEP with the proposed changes if they become final. We're looking to revise. Some of you may be familiar with the implementing guide, the monograph. We're working to revise that entire document to be more consistent with the changes that we're proposing for the CEP. Another CEP question. With regards to CEP, will student satisfaction surveys be provided? Similar to the levels of graduate and employer satisfaction, the survey is the most common instrument. It's not required that you do a survey to evaluate satisfaction. So that instrument, you decide what instrument you use, what questions you ask, etc. We do not have templates for them. And I believe that's all the CEP questions. Will learning sites need a CEP? No, because learning sites don't exist on their own. The data for learning sites, the student enrollment, retention, that gets tied into the main or the managing campuses CEP. It's not at the learning site level. Why is the graduation rate no longer taken into consideration? Because ACICS did not explore that element, meaning we have no baseline, we have no minimum standards, no expectations for a school. It's somewhat difficult to expect you to evaluate graduation rate, like with retention or placement, when we say there's no threshold, there's no, what is the lowest you can go in terms of graduation rate. Then the formula that we developed was somewhat interesting, to put it nicely, and was not consistent with the expectations from the Department of Ed, which made it more confusing for our schools. So instead of helping the institution evaluate its effectiveness of graduation rate, that became more of a source of confusion. That's why we removed it. We're proposing to have it removed.
I'm going to read a couple of questions for Tony, since he's doing this remotely, so he is not able to see what we see. Tony, here are a couple of questions regarding your subject area with the disclosures. Will state regulators be copied on the reviews of institutional disclosures?
Thank you, Tehran. So what we're doing at this point is totally internal collection, internal between ACICS and member institutions. Both the substance of the information that we collect, its analysis, its feedback to the institutions, and then the school's response to ACICS stays within the council. There is no point and no intent to share any of that with the other oversight partners. However, it must be very clear that what we're talking about is the review of public disclosures. So the degree to which ACICS member institutions disclose indications of institutional effectiveness to the public that are clear and that also include the required element of indications of student achievement, their quality and integrity in doing so will in fact be subject to review by everybody and anybody who has an interest, including our other oversight partners. In this case would be state oversight authorities, would include the Department of Education, both the Accreditation Division and the Title IV compliance folks, and also the Council on Higher Education Accreditation. So the manifestation of this process will in fact be very visible ultimately, and its effectiveness or lack of effectiveness will be very visible as well. There is no point in us, however, sharing that information directly with the other oversight partners, because they will say the proof is in the pudding. If we can see it for ourselves on the institution's website that we're satisfied, ACICS that you have the standards and that you've applied the standards appropriately to create the types of disclosures that meet their expectations. Next question.
Thanks, Tony. The next question is just clarifying that certification and licensure pass rates are to be on the school's website.
So again, the list that was included in the slides and that will be included in the guidance document is not meant to be mandatory, nor is it meant to be exhaustive. It is meant to be exemplary. So to the degree that you as an institution decide that one of the indications of student achievement that you collect data for and elect to disclose to the public, particularly you elect to disclose it to prospective students, then it will be subject to our review, and we will at some point encounter it and say and give you feedback in terms of how the clarity with which that information is shared, the profile that it is given, and perhaps also what was the independent verification, what was the source of that data, so that if we or an oversight partner requires that the underlying source of that information be checked, you're able to do that. But whether you include that particular indicator of student achievement is strictly up to the institution. We just wanted to give you a list so that we're not dealing with abstractions. Next question.
Tony, I think that is it so far regarding your topic. Thank you for providing us that additional feedback.
So, Perlita unfortunately had to step out. The toddler cooties, I guess, got her. So there are still a few questions about the CEP, specifically the new student satisfaction requirement. So just to be clear, starting in July 1st, the proposed changes would be effective July 1st, 2016, and it would be that there would no longer be a graduation rate, and that not as really a replacement to that, but just as a separate element, there'd be a requirement to review the level of student satisfaction for those for current students. So there's a question about retention and whether that would still be required. That would certainly still be required, that we consider a separate rate than graduation rate. So retention rate is still required, and student satisfaction would now be a requirement, and no longer would graduation rates be required. There's also a question or asking for clarification about ill-prepared applicants or ill-prepared students. We have nowhere in the criteria where that is stated. It's just anybody that doesn't meet the institution's admission requirements, which are those that are determined by the institution, would clearly be considered an ill-prepared applicant.
Yes, there's a question I'm going to read, and I believe I'll throw it to Dr. Gray to respond to. The question is, the institution must require faculty members to engage in practical or scholarly research and to publish in professional journals. What is considered a professional journal? One listed in a KBEL's directory or something else? What about professional presentations at academic conferences, like at an ACICS conference? Or if he or she is a professional practitioner in their field outside of the academic role? And Dr. Gray will respond.
Thank you, Sue. I think the key to this question, or the answer to it, lies in the last phrase: practitioners and other, or in fields outside their academic field. ACICS is not going to give you a list of what are acceptable professional journals or what journals or publications should be excluded from consideration. What counts is their relevance to your area of practice and teaching. So if you publish in any kind of a journal or publication that relates to your field of expertise and to the field in which you are instructing students, then that would be considered acceptable publication in your field of practice. On the other hand, if you're publishing in a field that's not related to your teaching, instructional, and academic credentials, then that wouldn't be considered part of the credential that the council is considering for qualifications at the doctoral instructional level. The the issue or the example of presenting at an ACICS conference and whether or not that would be considered publication for purposes of establishing the credential of the instructor at the doctoral level. Well, the answer is if the information or the presentation at the ACICS conference is, again, in your area of expertise and instructional assignment, then in fact it would count toward that requirement. If, however, it is not, it is outside, it's more general, then it wouldn't be considered publication or presentation in your area of professional endeavor.
There is a question, and a good one, I think, about how do you volunteer to serve as a stakeholder. I assume that's the stakeholder for the Systematic Review Advisory Committee. I'll make another plug that Perlita already did, which would be you'd want to email Ms. Perlita Walters-Gilliam at pwgilliam@acics.org. And again, we are looking for exceptional students who'd like to serve on who do serve on student councils and can serve as an ambassador and provide a student-centric perspective on ACICS standards. We're looking for faculty members who can provide feedback for our standards, as well as graduates, so those students who have already graduated who could provide feedback from that point of view, as well as employers, perhaps those who serve on advisory boards who could strengthen the mission of the institution and can provide valuable feedback for that. So again, the individual would be Ms. Perlita Walters-Gilliam, and her email address is listed on the ACICS memo to the field.
Yes, this is Sue, and Ian, I'm sure would also add that you will have the opportunity at the end of this webinar, you will have a survey sent out to you, and at the end of that survey is another opportunity for you to submit or sign anyone up who might be a friend or foe. I also am going to read a question with respect to placement, and the question has to do with how long must someone be placed in a job or employed before they are considered a placement. You may know that ACICS does not put any quantitative measurement on times with respect to hire date to possible leave of an employment. The institution has the burden of justifying how you interpreted that placement to be considered a valid ACICS placement according to our definition. And
Okay, this is Taran, and I'm going to answer a couple of questions. I see that one question is regarding the CEP. Are student satisfaction rates replacing graduation rates? They're not actually student satisfaction rates. We're adding student satisfaction surveys for you to distribute to your students, as well as the graduate and employer surveys, and we are removing references to graduation rates from our criteria, as we have not developed, or the council has not developed, any graduation rate or standards. Can you clarify how international students are defined as placed under this new memorandum? I'm not exactly sure what you are referring to, but keeping in mind that part of the campus accountability report, there is an exemption for students on a visa. And if you have further questions about that, you can email me directly. My email and phone number are on the ACICS website.
There's some questions about the community resources. So the question is, can you give some examples of community resources? What activities would be acceptable? The change, we don't give specific in the definition. However, really the same community resources that were included before would be acceptable again, such as guest speakers, field trips, involvement in trade associations, advisory committees again would be an acceptable community resources. The real change is that there must be a variety of community resources, or the proposed change would be that there's a variety and that they're in each program. So the expectation or the hope of the proposed change is to really clarify what the expectation for community resources is. There's also a couple questions about removal of 32-hour from faculty loads. The first question is, can you elaborate on the 32-hour removal for faculty loads? Is this at the individual school's discretion, and what constitutes reasonable? And then what is the effective date for removing 32-hour teaching load? As was said previously, all of the proposed changes, if finalized, would be effective July 1st, 2015, except for the council action process one, which would be effective January 1st, 2016. Then the expectation is that it would be reasonable. That this is already what is included at the academic associates and bachelor's level, is that that faculty, have reasonable teaching load. So technically, it would be at the discretion. However, certain position descriptions, so if the individual is an administrator as well as faculty, and other responsibilities would certainly be taken into account to make sure that the faculty has a reasonable load.
So this is Sue again, and the question is, if what you said is true, a campus that is chosen in January would provide February placement data by March 1st. I didn't give the exact dates, but your concept is as we are proposing. We would contact you the month prior to the one that we're going to ask you to record and submit your placement activity. The actual date when we are going to provide you with a deadline to submit is probably in the beta test we did 5 days into the next month. So to your question, we would contact you in January. You would be required to download the spreadsheet and start recording each time a placement is recorded during the month of February. And you would be required to upload and provide us that data no later than March 5th is the anticipated dates at this point.
There's a question again regarding the graduation rate. It says, by removing the graduation rate, does that mean that retention will not be looked at and only student satisfaction? No, that's not what it means. It means that the retention requirement for the CEP will remain, and in addition to that, we will be looking at requiring student satisfaction surveys in the CEP.
There's a question regarding a special case in doctorate accreditation, and that question is, for institutions with Juris Doctorate instructors, how do they do research? I assume being a working lawyer or a judge is appropriate. Well, actually, Juris Doctorate, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, nor even in this webinar. But Juris Doctorate would be a special case in terms of the doctorate degree, in the sense that research such as working in the profession on legal decisions, on briefs, on any of the many types of publications and papers that are produced in a scholarly fashion by attorneys, that would certainly constitute, I would think, and fulfill the requirements of publication, and really research would not apply directly in terms of that particular doctorate degree.
I see another question about the car. And just to be clear, the question is, if there's less than 10 graduates in a program, is that looked at ACICS by ACICS for that program's placement number, or just in the overall numbers for placement? Starting with the 2015 submission, all graduates are considered in whether the council, whether an institution does not meet the council standard of 60%. So where previously we had an exemption for less than 10 programs not being considered, that is no longer the case, as it was outlined in the student achievement letters that were distributed the early part of the summer to all schools, which states that starting in 2015, all programs, regardless of the number of graduates, for placement and licensure pass rates, as well as all students enrolled for retention, will be taken into consideration.
There's still some more questions about student satisfaction levels and in the CEP, so I will try and answer a few of those. The first I see is how frequently will student satisfaction surveys be administered? That's an institutional decision. However, of course, the CEP is required to be looked at least annually. So to answer would be at least annually, but you can certainly do it more frequently than that. But it would be similar to graduate and employer satisfaction. So it would be at a time that's dictated by the institution. I saw another question, this one related actually to graduate surveys. Can you clarify that we need to do graduate surveys on grads and graduate surveys on placed graduates? There's actually no change to the level of graduate satisfaction in this proposed changes, but you would need to at least do graduate satisfaction after placement. There are instances of institutions that do both, that do graduate satisfaction following graduation as well as graduate satisfaction following placement, but we at least look for graduate satisfaction following placement. Another one this time regarding student satisfaction is when you say you are adding student satisfaction to the CEP, is a survey the only way to gather data? No, it's not the only way, so we are just looking for the level of student satisfaction. Surveys often are the most frequent one used, but if there's another methodology for you to garner student satisfaction and analyze it and summarize it, then that certainly would be allowed to be put within the CEP.
Yes, this is Sue, and I'm going to take a question asking if there are any webinars for those wishing to seek ACICS accreditation. ACICS does have a process for initial applicants. It's quite detailed and quite extensive, and no one on this current webinar panel is part of that very small group. My suggestion is that you reach out to Dr. Gurabatham to answer your question directly, we do have webinars for initial applicants, and we do have webinars for those wishing to become an ACICS accredited institution. Those webinars are not regularly scheduled. It's by volume and request. So again, by reaching out to Dr. Joseph Gurabotham, you can go on our website under About Us, and you'll see the staff directory, and you can send him a direct email.
Just to get back to CEP, there's some follow-up questions of what I just said. So graduate satisfaction after placement, is that the employer satisfaction of the graduate or the graduate satisfaction after being placed? You do need to do level of employer satisfaction, so that would certainly need to occur after the graduate has been placed, but you'd also need to do graduate satisfaction following placement. So that would be both of those. There's another question back to faculty loads and the 32-hour requirement. For faculty load, can you talk about the number of preps in the occupational degree? Is that going away too? We have not changed the number of preparations for occupational degrees or proposed those changes. The council may be looking at that in the future in discussing the amount of preparations, but as of this time, there's no change to that specific or proposed change to that specific requirement.
There's a question regarding the changes that are outlined in this memorandum to the field and whether they're effective July 2016. Yes, these would be effective July 1st, 2016.
And this is Sue again. I'm taking the easy questions. Is the council reconsidering allowing schools to readmit ATB students? We still have ATB criteria. We haven't restricted that. The Department of Ed changed the ATB regulations, and I understand they may change again. So I would suggest you get with your financial aid consultants. As far as ACICS reconsidering, as I said, the criteria remains in our criteria. I'll take another question. Is just to confirm, a placement does not require any specific length of time or time of employment to be considered a placement. You are correct. ACICS does not establish a time. Again, as I continue to say, and I truly feel that you've heard this through many of the panel members, the burden is on the institution to justify a placement. If in your environment you feel someone had 1 day of employment and you knew they had 1 day of employment, would you feel satisfied with considering them placed? I'll read another question. If an instructor does not have a terminal degree in an area they are teaching, what is the minimum education requirement for that instructor? That's very determinant upon the credential level that that faculty is teaching in. I would suggest you check our criteria under each of the different credential levels, and if you still have a question, you can send an email and reach out to us and we can be very specific with your concern. The next question, if an instructor took and passed a CLEP exam in math, is he considered qualified to teach math course in undergraduate degrees as opposed to having 18 credits in math? We qualify by the credits in the particular area of study, so the passing of an exam would not satisfy our requirements in and of themselves. In case of question got lost in the mix, do doctoral prepared faculty have to be involved in research if they are teaching master's level? And I will throw that one to Dr. Gray.
Yeah, this is Al Gray. The requirements and the assignments for faculty teaching at the master's level, at the master's degree level, are covered in 36502 of the criteria. And that language has not been changed as of this time. So essentially, teaching at the master's level, while participation in research and scholarly activities and publishing in professional journals is encouraged, unlike in the doctoral program, it is not an absolute requirement. It enhances the credential, but other factors are considered, and it's not an absolute requirement of the credential in the master's degree program at this time. And as I said, the criteria 3-6-502 has not been changed as of this time.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. If you have additional questions, you can certainly feel free to email myself or Ian, and we'll be happy to answer your questions or direct you to the appropriate person if we're unable to. Just quickly, I'd like to remind you that the slides will be available on our website under the Events/Workshops tab. Then you would click on Webinars and then Aware, and then beginning tomorrow, you will have access to the recording of this webinar. And please, you will receive an email at the conclusion of this webinar, and we're asking for your feedback via our electronic survey on the memorandum to the field. So please take a few minutes to review and give us your feedback. Thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon.